This module is called Data Centers in Mobile. It's really about data centers, but within a mobile context and within the context of smart government. There are three types of data centers that we will define, starting with the first one called internal on-site. The simple definition is that internal on-site means you own the building, the equipment, and the data. It's a very secure model because you can control access, physical access. There are many layers of protecting these assets and many network security controls that can be put in place in terms of configurations and access to anything, the physical or the logical aspects of, inside of the data center. Its disadvantage is that it's very expensive. Because you own the facility, that means you provide the electricity, the heating, the ventilation, the cooling, all part of your cost in running the data center. Even fuel for generators. This is a short list of the many costs associated with running a data center. On the personnel side, you manage the people, both the people who manage the servers, the data, the systems, the network, but also the physical protection that comes along with owning and managing your own internal on-site data center. The second kind is called hosted or co-located. A short version of this is called colo. Someone else, a provider, owns the building and the equipment. The data and typically the applications and the system, the racks, the servers, are things that you own. And the arrangement is one in which you are really paying for a shared space, a shared piece of the geography inside of that data center. Physical access controls sort of depends. You can control the access into the racks in a cage. That can be arranged and is easier to do inside of hosted colo type of arrangements. Government customers have limited controls, but they can establish some kind of physical and logical controls inside of these kind of hosted provider type of data centers. The key disadvantage is that it is moderately expensive. But here it's a trade-off, and so this is sort of the middle of the road between the most expensive that we talked about a moment ago and the least expensive, which will follow on in this next discussion. The last and the third of the three models that we're describing is called the cloud, or X as a service, where the X stands for infrastructure, for platform, for software as a service, even possibly security as a service. In this case, the provider owns the building, owns the equipment, including the servers, and the only thing you own is the data. Obviously, from a security perspective, you are not given physical access to the building. You can go to the front office, but typically access into the back side of the building where the servers are hosted are not permitted for anyone to gain access to. And so for a government customer, this becomes possibly a constraint that may not even be possible. So in the government, one way to get around this is actually to create a cloud model that is strictly for government, and this does exist, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So maintenance windows, decommissioning, security of data on the storage devices, all of these can happen inside of the cloud model. It is the least expensive model. That's the key advantage. The least space, least equipment, the least staff, all of it makes it very attractive from a cost perspective. So this slide is a decision matrix aid, where on the left-hand side, the left-hand column, there's a series of questions that you can ask yourself to help make decisions about whether the options of internal on-site, hosted, co-located, or the cloud, X as a service, are really the options to choose from. And to make decisions, you just run through this series of questions around, do I need to own the building? Do I need to own the equipment, have direct security control, have physical access, or is cost my principal driver? When you ask these series of questions and then you look to the right-hand side, you see the intersection of the cells there for the different choices of internal, hosted, or the cloud model, you can make the right kinds of choices. If cost is a key consideration, then the best option may be the cloud because it's the least expensive. If you need something that gives you sort of middle of the road in terms of control for the data, but you don't want to own the building, then maybe the hosted co-located model is the one to go with. Also very common, very typical to use this kind of a model. But if you really need to own the building, to have physical control, to own the equipment, everything under your own control, then obviously the internal on-site model is still best. An example, ministry-owned data center is really the best example of an internal on-site data center. Leasing data centers like from Etisalat or Do is the middle of the road, and Amazon Web Services is an example of a cloud, purely public commercial cloud option that's available to customers. But it's important to ask a question, another question, which is probably the one that's going to be the principal reason for making these kinds of decisions, which is, where is my data? And it's not information in terms of presentations or documents that we're talking about alone. There's metadata. There's the data about the usage, about who logged on, about accounts. All that kind of information fits the definition of metadata. Multimedia type of data, the application itself, the security data, the system logs, all of that is sort of a consideration that you should take into mind when making decisions about whether going with an internal on-site, hosted, co-located, or in truly a commercial or cloud access service as a service model. And another key question to ask is, can I still comply with my security regulations in terms of controlling my own data? In the internal on-site model, that's the easiest one. The answer is yes. When you get all the way to as a cloud, it becomes more difficult. So if you look at the designations in that right-hand column, it says depends, limited, depends, and more difficult. So it's not that it cannot be done, it's that it sort of depends on the agreements that are struck with the providers. Now, getting to how this works into smart government, the National Network Infrastructure Initiative, which is going to operate much like a federal cloud, is in fact going to be able to provide for federal entities a cloud model. So it has all the advantages of really owning your own, but in a shared model where the government as an entity overall is going to provide the physical facility, and you as an organization inside of the government can have ownership of the applications, the data, those kinds of things that you're responsible for inside of your own entity. So data centers, services, network connectivity between the federal entities, all of that is part of this smart government initiative called the National Network Infrastructure Initiative. It's also a partnership with the carriers, the app store providers, many others that make this possible for this to work. So it's not truly all government by itself. It's really in collaboration and cooperation with the commercial partners. And here you can have really any kind of model. You can have a co-location model. You can have infrastructure as a service. You can have platform as a service, software as a service. All of these models can still apply inside of this future smart government initiative. The key advantage, obviously, you'll be able to keep the data. The government is in control of all the data, and it stays inside of your own borders. So in summary, there are three types of data center services that I just described. There are advantages and disadvantages to the three different choices, and it's really a matter of organizational needs in terms of making those kinds of choices. So the criteria in the matrix that was provided earlier is a way to help you make those kinds of choices.